Welcome back, everyone, to Forward Thinking. It's Chrissy and Charlie here.
Hello.
Today we have our guest, Jessenia Francisco, and Jessenia is the Marketing Technology Program Lead at Asana. And today she's going to talk us through kind of her unique experience. Jessenia started her operations career on the sales ops side and recently made the switch to marketing operations. And I thought, what a unique story. The operations worlds are so intertwined. You see revenue ops, and we've talked about that on past podcasts. And so I thought it'd be great to have her on to discuss her whole career path, but also specifically the switch and the differences. So welcome, Jessenia.
So glad to be here. Excited to join you finally.
Yeah. So I love getting to know our guests on podcasts. We both do, and so it'd be great to give us a little bit of background on yourself and your origin story and how you made it into this crazy world of operations.
Yeah, I'm happy to start there. So I usually like to start just to give a disclaimer. I'm a former New Yorker, and that's how I apologize for my directness. And I moved to the Bay Area within the past 5 years. And so really I was just seeking a reprieve for the snow, and then really just trying to find my way through the Bay Area within kind of the nonprofit and operations space. But I'll give you a little bit about kind of my lily path of a career in terms of how I got into the ops space. I really wanted to study forensic psychology when I was a little girl going into college. And at a moment of kind of weakness or trying to figure out what I wanted to study, I decided that finance was instead the route that I was going to take. So really, I think growing up, I've never really heard about background or kind of like a path to study like operations. It was really kind of a shoestring of a couple of different topics in school that kind of got me interested into technology, really kind of set the foundation around my interest around finance. And then naturally, when I studied finance in the New York tri-state area, the natural progression for me to do was just to go into finance within an investment bank. So I followed that kind of straight shot path. And so I found myself as a financial analyst at Merrill Lynch, which was going through the merger with Bank of America at that time. And really, it was just kind of a good foundation to my career. And so it was my first exposure to software development. So half of my job was focused on making sure that we did FP&A work for the large business units. And then the other half was managing an in-house software where we captured estimates and actuals for their 3 largest divisions. So exposing myself to that world, I was like, this is cool. We're managing a software. It had a super not cool name. It's called Green Sheets. And so it was great because I was a partner to the business and I was a partner to the technology team to really reimagine and create business processes that were manual. So going from a spreadsheet to actually putting it into a system on a daily basis and then training people on how to effectively use it. And so when I took, after 3 years there, when I took a look at what I was interested, first I was kind of disillusioned. It was a really hard time for the financial services industry when I got into finance. And so I was a bit disillusioned with my career in finance and decided I wanted to do a 180 and went into the nonprofit space. Wow. So found myself wanting to hold on to kind of that business analysis, software development component and trying to find a place for that in the nonprofit space. So that's really kind of the shoestring that ties like me going from investment banking to nonprofit to tech is really holding on to that software development, like really the drive and the curiosity across the different industries about how do you make people efficient and how do you accelerate their strategy through software overall. So I found myself as a nonprofit professional across different causes, diversity and inclusion for Latinos and women. I then moved on into education, venture philanthropy, microfinance before I found my way to Asana.
Wow. That's a great story. And then, so one thing that struck to me, you said there you had a moment of weakness when you decided to study finance and get into finance. And obviously that maybe wasn't the right fit for you. What was like the pressure that made you do that? Was there any pressure from like family, or was it just, you're in New York, you see a lot of people having these thriving careers in finance and you thought this is your safe bet and in getting into a good career? What was that pressure?
A couple of those components. So I'm first generation, so my parents both immigrated here. And so my father was terrified a little bit at the prospect of me becoming a forensic psychologist. He's like, aren't criminals dangerous? Why would you want to put yourself in danger? And I was like, well, that might be true, but I'm just, talking to them. And so it was a bit of that. And then also taking a look at the prospects of like especially like going through college and figuring out like what is actually going to earn money. I think it was a bit of the family pressure and okay, how am I going to be a functioning adult after I pick something?
Yeah.
And it just felt very tangible to pick finance as opposed to feeling a little bit like unpredictable if I did choose a career in forensic psychology, even though the university I went to was very well known for their criminology degree.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I think I can feel that similar experience just growing up. My mom was an immigrant and she didn't really have the chance to go to college. And so I had all these plans of maybe becoming a teacher, or then I said I want to do like food marketing, and being in the Bay Area, you graduate college and you're like, what am I going to do next? And you see everyone going into tech, and I did make my way there. And luckily now I get to teach people things, and, you get some parallels of maybe what you wanted to do in your current role. And I think we'll touch on that in a bit with your forensic psychology. But so you made your way into the nonprofit world and probably feeling a bit more fulfilled because you're helping a good cause. But did you have exposure to the technology side there? And how did you make that jump then from New York back to, or here to California?
Yeah, so I did have some exposure. I mean, when I was at Merrill Lynch Bank of America, I kind of understood the construct of a database. I mean, it's a really simple just architecture. And if you understand the relationship between things, most softwares are built the same way. So like Salesforce is interchangeable with HubSpot and all the different CRMs. And so if you understand some of the basic principles, it's something that was able to kind of I could bring with me throughout my career, kind of understanding that and then being able to build or imagine with kind of a technology partner or like a solution architect that could help me. So I made my way to San Francisco really on a whim. After I had left Bank of America, I joined a nonprofit focused on Latino professionals across the business industries, and found it really, really fulfilling, and then had kind of a leadership transition and found myself again kind of disillusioned, like, what do I do from here? And so I started to apply to like leadership development programs, and there was a leadership development program that had a pairing system where they would pair you with a nonprofit or a nonprofit or a social impact business in DC and San Francisco. And at that point, I had taken a little bit of a break from working, and a nonprofit in San Francisco called me. And I was like, you're crazy. I'm not moving across country when I'm unemployed. And they're like, it sounds like you need relocation assistance, and every step, like every hurdle or every roadblock that I put up, around moving across country. I had never been to California prior to that. So I moved
Oh,
to
wow.
California like sight unseen.
Oh, wow. That's
Um,
crazy.
I was like, I know it's beautiful there, so they say. Well, I'll figure it out. And so, that person just made it really, really hard for me to say no. And literally, I found myself like I had a scheduled meeting with that individual, and it was for like the final, like, are you gonna move? Are you gonna take this job? And I was like coming up with like my pitch on like how I was not moving across country, and I was like, she's gonna poke holes in all of this, and I just ended up saying yes. And that's what brought me here, and moved here, knew one person in San Francisco, and really kind of pulled a community and a life together here.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit about that program, and where was that jump then from there? How did that open up some opportunities for you in the tech world in San Francisco?
Yeah, so it was a program. It still exists. It's called Pro Inspire. They had kind of a nonprofit leadership development program. And so it was a year-long program where every month we had specifically like targeted leadership development sessions that we needed to do. And it was done in a cohort fashion. And actually, they're probably some of the closest people that I have to me. We meet at least 2 to 3 times a year still, even though it was 5 years ago. And it was really interesting because we supported each other and went through this transition where all of them were either in different cities across the United States and moving back to the Bay Area, or taking a plunge into the nonprofit space. And so it was really a kind of an emotional and tumultuous time for each of us, where we bonded through that, in addition to learning really relevant skills, like managing up, being able to put together a strategy, understanding where your strengths and your weaknesses are, and how to use that to your advantage. And so through that program, just really found my network here, where a lot of them, or at least a percentage of them, have moved into the tech space or different industries overall. So we all, after kind of being in the nonprofit space and going through this emotional time, really just kind of found our calling in different places, whether that be tech or education or the government. Mm-hmm.
So how can you tell me a bit more about kind of how you then took all of that learning and then applied it to your career in operations? Because we talk a lot about this. A lot of people who end up in what we do, they might come from kind of a technical background. They might be maybe a bit introverted. They don't have some of those soft skills, like you mentioned, like managing up and being able to communicate. And sometimes it can be a bit of something holding them back, kind of developing through the operations career for some people. But it sounded like you had this amazing experience, which was able to set you up so perfectly well to go in
Mm-hmm.
and thrive in that type of role and really elevate yourself in that type of position.
Yeah, what I would say is curiosity. I think curiosity is so underrated. And honestly, as we go through hiring, I honestly look for curiosity in conversation. Just your ability to not be a subject matter expert, and then become that such subject matter expert, really, because I find that that's something that has grounded me in all of my pivots, and it's really, really helpful. So yeah, curiosity is definitely something I think that is really helpful in the operations space, mainly because you're a fixer. You have to find the things that are broken. And if you're not curious about it, if you ignore it, or you don't see that it's a problem, like from a people perspective, you're going to lose sight of that. You're going to lose sight of the bigger picture. So I think definitely curiosity is something that has helped me. The people skills, I'm really, I don't want to say like I'm really good at something, but I think that I'm really in tune with empathy. And I know we were joking about forensic psychology, but I think it comes from that, like the curiosity in terms of people and just observing them on how things land, especially within the Bay Area. within the Bay Area in terms of just really understanding how people feel. They keep that really guarded, as opposed to New York, where everyone will tell you, like, just word vomit how they feel. And so it's been really helpful for me to just get a sense of a room and say, okay, let's call a spade. And you see that like sigh of relief. Okay, yes, we're speaking the truth. We don't have to sugarcoat it. It didn't work. That's fine. It's an experiment. Let's move on and take our learnings from there. So I think that that's been really helpful, the people management piece, and really kind of accelerating some of the conversations that are normally blocked overall. So those are the ones that I could think about. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would love to dive in a little bit more on the curiosity piece, because obviously you mentioned you're hiring right now. And so when you're interviewing people, how do you kind of like understand their level of curiosity? Do you have any good questions that you ask, or is it just something that maybe kind of intuitively you kind of pick up on based on answers to all of their questions?
Yeah, I would probably say not to give the secrets
Okay.
of our interviewing, but I think that it's something that comes out naturally in terms of a lot of the times we put together kind of like panels on like, show me a case study. And I think it naturally comes out like how they found the problem. Did someone tell them that that was a problem, or did they find the problem specifically, right? I think that especially when you talk about building a relationship, right? A lot of the work in the operation space is based upon the relationships that you have with stakeholders. There's a personal and there's a professional curiosity. And like we talk about, how do you build trust, right? And sometimes there are people who think that, you can like engineer a relationship. And quite honestly, like if you don't have curiosity, like, what are you doing today? What's the weather on your, side of this earth, right? You're never going to get to true trust. And so I tend to ask questions about not what your process is, but like, where's your curiosity peaking in terms of finding problems, and how do you build trust, or how do you build relationships based on that curiosity?
So then at Asana, when you started, did you start in finance, or did you start in sales operations and then move into marketing operations? Can you tell us through your journey there?
Yeah, so I started in sales operations. So I was one of the first technology hires on the operations, the sales operations space. So really as soon as I stepped foot, they're like, here's all of our tech stack, fix it. And it was really because I was familiar with Salesforce. So at a couple of nonprofits, I had actually implemented Salesforce a couple of times, in addition to like marketing automation tools. And so there was a lot of transferable skills between pivoting from the nonprofit space, at least with my experience, into sales operations, where they were Asana's a Salesforce heavy shop. And so being able to see that, and then I've also in the nonprofit space built a tech stack around Salesforce, around efficiency, specifically around like tracking of emails, automation of other aspects of the day-to-day for a fundraising professional. And so dipping into Asana, they were like, great, now you need to do that times 3. And so worked with all of the sales team to kind of manage and make sense of their tech stack, especially as a growing startup that they were at that time.
What was like the biggest difference at first when I assume going from a nonprofit to a company like Asana, maybe the stakes are higher, you're feeling a little bit more of like a cultural shift because the goals are different, right? For a venture-backed startup, it's all about, how do we meet our goals? How do we produce revenue? And how do we make our investors happy? Where for a nonprofit, there's different goals there. It's more like, how can we drive more donations? How can we get these grants, et cetera, et cetera. did you feel that change? I guess you probably were used to it from some of your background in the finance, but did you actually feel like a cultural change? What was that big difference you felt when you made that switch?
Yeah, what I would probably say is the speed in which things moved from the nonprofit space. I felt we were like glacial. It was a turtle pace, and then we went to like rabbit pace. Definitely, that was a big shock from like a culture perspective. I would also say the jargon. A lot of the terminology was new to me in terms of just being in the tech space. And I found myself often like saying, yes, I got that. And then like trying to figure out what terminology they were using. And it was just different terminology. It's not that like the concepts were foreign to me, but just being able to talk the talk. Eventually, I realized that people didn't think of me as the nonprofit person if I could use essentially, I'm going to crack it because it's a sales technique, like the mirroring and being able to use vocabulary that they were acquainted with, that they would see me as like the advisor, the partner to them. And so very early on, it was really trying to up my vocabulary when it came to working with the sales and operations and technology stakeholders, and then making sure that I was at the same speed. The other thing that it wasn't necessarily new to me, but something that I was coming back to, back in finance, I was at a global firm, but in a nonprofit, I was not. I didn't have to often deal with different time zones. So coming into Asana, where we had offices in different countries, it was, I would get the Yelp call from all parts of the world. And that was a little bit hard, especially being kind of the solo like tech ops person within sales ops.
So then how long were you in sales ops before you made the switch to marketing ops, and what was the catalyst for that switch?
Yeah, so I was in sales ops for a year before I transitioned into marketing. So when I was in sales ops, I was assigned a lot of projects working directly with marketing. And what I found myself was just going back to that curious about how do we get to these leads a little bit earlier in their journey, right? We were standing up demand gen at that time. And so specifically, I wanted to fix the problems that were at the top of the funnel instead of by the time that they got to sales. And, of course, it's that old story where sales is disillusioned with the leads that are in front of them. And so I found myself more and more curious about fixing those problems as opposed to fixing the problems in sales, and really just recognize that within myself and kind of made that jump over to the marketing operations team.
Did you have how did you make that switch? Like, did you find like an internal champion that could help you do that? Was there someone that you worked with heavily on the marketing side that said, hey, it looks like you're really good understanding this marketing ops thing. Like maybe you should do the switch. It sounds like you're, great at understanding people, but was it actually find an internal champion to help you make that switch? Or was there just an opening and then you decided to, hey, might as well apply for it?
It was a couple of those different components. So Asana is really great, not just because I work there, but in terms of just exposure to different startups, in addition to like just my past experience within investment banking and the nonprofit space, like internal transfers are a really hard thing for companies to manage. And at Asana, it's fairly easy. It's done in transparency. So there was an open role because I was in sales ops working specifically with the marketing team. I already knew those champions, and through the work that they had seen me do on the sales operation side, they're like, yeah, I'll take you. You want to come tomorrow? They're like, we'll have you. And then I think it was a bit of a synergy for me where I had buy-in from the marketing stakeholders because I was working closely with them, in addition to internal champions, both on the sales operation side as well as on the marketing side. So I'm part of Asana Women, which is our women ERG. And so I just had access to kind of executive sponsors within the marketing side that kind of made all of this really stick for me and made, my requests come true.
So how would you rate working in marketing ops versus sales ops? And I think one of the things that we talk about a lot, and you mentioned it about empathy, I think there needs to be an empathy between those two teams, right? And they need to have like really strong alignment. They need to kind of really understand what they're going through, because sometimes, one team might have to say, no, sorry, I can't do that now for you, marketing ops, or vice versa. And you have to understand why they can't do it. Maybe they're implementing CPQ and it's a big project they're trying to get done or something, and they can't really help marketing ops now. And I think without the experience of working in both roles, it's maybe a bit harder to have that empathy. You're always just like, oh, they're seen as the no team, or there's a bit of conflict, or it's just a bit harder to get things done. But then with your background, you understand both of these teams from having been inside them and working within them. It must bring a lot of value and kind of smooths things out between you and the sales ops team at Asana, and really builds that empathy and trust between the teams.
Yeah, that's true. What I would say is that a lot of it is around relationships and understanding personality, especially for the time that I was there, where probably a couple, like a handful of individuals were working as AEs and then have moved into being sales managers. And so just understanding the quirks and understanding what works and what doesn't work. I'm pretty much a great resource for like our marketing ops team to understand like who should you be talking to, how you should be presenting that information. And so typically if they're frustrated, I'll go to them and give them like, here's how you should rethink about approaching that again. I think also from like a sales perspective, there's a lot of things that you don't see, even though we're really, really close in terms of goals overall and just working together, just understanding from just like a workflow perspective. And this happens a lot when we build out technology components and like enhancements overall, where sometimes we forget about the end user. And I was like, have you spoken to that sales user? Because you're like re-engineering their entire workflow. And if it takes more than 5 clicks, they're probably going to hate you. And you're going to have to do it again.
Yeah.
Right? So just bringing that empathy back into the conversation and saying like, great, we have a great idea about how we want to measure things, but let's think about what the impact is, both to, going upstream and then going downstream to that end user. And making sure that that's at the forefront of the things that we work on from a technology perspective, but also the way that we approach our stakeholders in sales as well.
So are you able to talk about how kind of like your teams are managed? So like you're the marketing technology lead, like are you part of marketing ops or just marketing in general? Like is there kind of a revenue ops umbrella that goes across, the technologies and ops teams?
Yeah, so we do have, we have our sales and marketing teams that are separate, and then we have ops teams for each of the business units. So our our marketing ops team is under revenue marketing, which is separate. So it's on the marketing team overall. But we work very closely with our sales counterparts day to day. In terms of how sales operations is split, we have a marketing technology pillar and then a campaign operations pillar. So I lead the marketing technology pillar. Mm-hmm.
So then in terms of the going back to my other question around the differences between your sales ops life and then the marketing technology life, how would you rate the two? Do you think you'll ever go back to sales ops? Do you think you're now in marketing ops? Would you like to run both teams one day as revenue ops?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably say I enjoy them equally. I think that both of them are interesting in different ways. I think that just in terms of my experience within Asana, it was a little bit of an overwhelming experience in a good way. And I think that a lot of the work that I'm doing in marketing is very focused around like specific things. So I think that, just to answer your question overall, like what would I want to go back to sales ops? Would I want to lead both of them? I think that there's a possibility for any of those. I think that I'm really excited about building kind of a tech roadmap for an ops for kind of like a marketing or a sales team in an ops capacity. And if there were an opportunity to do sales, marketing, and or a revenue ops role, I would be happy to do it because I have kind of both ends of that experience.
Yeah,
Cool.
so it sounds like we ask a lot of our guests like what their opinion of revenue operations is, because I think it's a new thing, new concept, and there could be a lot of reasons maybe to still keep those groups separate, but a lot of people want to jump on the bandwagon. Do you see, what's your opinion so far? Just not having been on a revenue ops team, but maybe from talking with some of your peers or from the benefits that you see might be there, do you think there is a benefit to having one team, a revenue ops team?
Yeah, what I would say is often what I find is that revenue ops is kind of thrown out there. So people use it in different ways. I think when we think about revenue ops as being like a consolidated ops groups, it solves some of the issues that sometimes we see around like different agendas between the ops team and like whose agenda wins, right? You never want to feel like there's an agenda that's winning. I think that when you have them unified under one umbrella, it means that there's no agenda. We have our agenda. And I think that there's some value depending on the organization and just the way that their business is structured. That there is value to have like a unified ops team and just making sure that those ops teams are optimized to serve the revenue kind of structure. So does it make sense? Yes. Right now we just don't have that structure at Asana, and I think we work fine. It's more about like how do you partner with the other ops team to know what's happening and make sure that you compromise or you collaborate when there is overlap on agenda, and that's a work in progress for us in itself. Like we're finding where sometimes we ask for the same thing in different ways, and we're still trying to optimize what that looks like for us. But overall, the harmony that we have is that we're all ops team, and we need to figure out a way to compromise and collaborate just to get our agendas to move forward.
Totally, yeah. We've talked about that in this podcast before, how you could have, all of the teams consolidated into a revenue ops team hierarchy. Great. But, you can get a lot of the benefit from just that mindset shift where you think about yourself as one team and you are like trying to understand everyone's agenda and prioritize across the teams and have that strong alignment. So you don't have to just like completely re-engineer your team hierarchies to get to revenue ops. You can kind of still have a revenue ops mentality.
There was a great quote that was said by one of our board members at one of our kickoffs that really resonated with me. And it was at a point that we were at a pivotal growth point in Asana. And this person said that the competition is outside of the doors of Asana, not within the doors of Asana. So when you think about being competitive, think about being competitive against like Asana's competitors. But inside, you want to make sure that you are all on the same page and that you're all driving growth and that you don't think that it's kind of like an ego or a competition internally. And so that quote I constantly remind myself of that because we don't want to be in a place where we're competing with each other as departments. And that's not the culture that we want to have at Asana.
Yeah,
totally.
Do you have any tips for anyone who maybe works in a company where their ops teams do have some conflict and to try and kind of bring harmony between the teams? Do you have anything that's worked well at Asana for you?
Yeah, I think, and I go back to this because while I was in sales ops, I got sales training. So we had a lot of the kind of tips and tricks and models that our sales team go through in terms of listening. We were able to listen in and kind of adapt them for our day-to-day. So I think listening is really important, right? And identifying the problem. And sometimes it's listening to your biggest complainer, your biggest, person that's at the opposition, and just really hearing them out and making them an ally. I think that that's really important. And being able to be able to at least have them as a stakeholder and say, like, although, we might compete for resources, like, I want to make sure that I understand what's your business case and what your impact is and how can we work together. And I think that it's silly to be at an organization where you have people who you don't collaborate with just because, they might have said something about your team, or like that just doesn't work. It creates more friction in the goals that you're trying to accomplish overall. And I think just listening, having some empathy, and trying to find some compromise out of that, regardless of how you feel, and maybe putting those feelings aside and saying, like, I want to help out a coworker, or I want to help out a different department for the best of this organization is a change in mindset overall.
Yeah. So I just want to switch gears. Jessenia, you and I actually met through Women in Revenue, which is a nonprofit that I co-founded. You mentioned it already, but you also co-lead Asana Women. So what inspired you to get involved with a mission to support women, especially at Asana? And Asana supports remote workers. And so, with companies right now where maybe it's a bit challenging to, have any groups working together, especially on a core mission, what have you been doing with Asana Women since being all remote?
Yeah. With Asana Women, and just to answer the first question, I'm really energized by women communities, women-led communities. I feel that, just in my work experience, I've experienced like women who have been catalysts in my career and pushing me to do the things that I didn't think I could do. And then I've also experienced women who have not been a kind of a positive influence. And I've always wanted to be that woman who's a catalyst. Like, you don't realize how small it is to say, like, you can do this work. Like, I believe in you, therefore you should believe in yourself. How that small, like, 2 sentences can really impact a woman and being able to see them progress and move past a challenge. And so a lot of the times, especially like as I've gone through my transition, I've just found these communities with women just really inspiring. And so I try my best to be at the forefront of trying to volunteer and help them, or help leading some of the programs that they put together. So it was natural for me when I came into Asana and see the group to kind of gravitate to that, and then be able to lead it eventually. To answer your question,
with your background, right? You're like the perfect person to do that at Asana with your nonprofit background. I think you mentioned you were part of nonprofits which were trying to, advance women and help women as well. So you must have been able to draw on all of that experience in that role.
Yeah. And pretty early on, and I don't think I mentioned it, pretty early on in my career, I had also served on several boards. So I had served on probably like three boards by the time I had, when I was in the nonprofit space and also in the finance space. And so I had a lot of volunteer management and being able to, which is really hard, and we don't talk about it enough, about how do you inspire people to do work when you're not paying them, when you're pulling at their heartstrings. So bringing that experience to Asana, I think, was really helpful. Especially as we talked about, like, just being able to put together committees and work with them to kind of see some of the work within the Asana Women kind of community come into fruition. But to answer your direct question around what have we been doing, we've put together a lot of fireside chats. So especially since we've gone to working from home and working remote, we had to do virtual onboarding. That is really hard for people. So we've participated in onboarding sessions where we showcase not only Asana Women, but the other ERGs. And that's really a key point where someone has an interaction with Asana Women face-to-face and has some time to talk about, like, what do we do, who they should know, and kind of get the insider scoop. So we've been doing a bit of that. We also have been doing fireside chats. So there's so many many amazing women at Asana, and they don't often get a lot of face time with other women. So what we've been doing is just picking out women within Asana who have really interesting stories, and just talking about a blend of their professional and their their personal lives. And so we had someone who is a voice actress, and she talked about how do you bring creativity and playfulness into your professional career. And so that was a fireside chat that we hosted. So we host them as lunches, and that's been a great place where a lot of people have been curious about just how do I bring, now that I can't leave my home, how do I bring the personal and professional aspects and just merge them? So we've been doing those fireside chats, and then professional development, which I think is super important. So we're actually hosting one today, but we've done 3 sessions around networking, online presence, and then the power of storytelling as well.
Yeah, one thing that kind of came to mind as you were talking about rallying volunteers who obviously aren't getting paid around, doing stuff. That must be really great experience for then that you can then leverage when you're trying to rally people who are getting paid, right? Because if you can rally people who aren't getting paid around a mission, it must be easy to rally people who are getting paid around a mission as well. So there's a lot of what I'm kind of seeing from you is like you've got all of these kind of experiences, even down to the forensic psychology, passion and when you were younger, that just kind of all blends together that can just help you in your daily job.
Yeah. I one thing that comes to mind, I was just listening to a podcast, and they were talking about this woman who they were having a hard time with the company. And so they created this new role called a change agent. So they take like maybe their top seller and have them go into the field and meet with everyone and inspire them and understand what they're doing and help get them to do their job better. And I think a lot of the times how operations could really use just a change agent at times, especially when you get into this deep kind of dysfunction where maybe teams aren't aligned. And but even outside of that, just having some of those characteristics and thinking of yourself as a change agent, especially at a startup where everyone's maybe feeling a bit burnout, or there might be other things there, and I see a lot of that in you, rallying people, inspiring people, and really trying to make a change. And marketing definitely needs that at times. And so it makes sense that maybe, that team would really be drawn to you and you'd see success doing that.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that because I'm a little bit of a change management nerd, where I love all the different models, and I've actually done workshops in regards to the different change management models. But I love that because we're in a world where we have to adapt. And that is not the easiest process for someone to adapt to change. Some people just completely shut down, and I find myself as someone that wants to guide them. I often talk about myself as being a partner. Like, I'm not the one telling you what to do. I'm the one advising you. And again, it's changing of that mindset. And it's a little bit, as you mentioned, some of the psychology background where I don't want to think about it as mind games, but it's how to effectively change someone's mindset so that they can see the change, specifically in my case, the technology that I'm putting in front of them.
Yeah, I mean, it's important because if all of the different aspects of operations, the people, the technology, the data, like if you might be able to implement a tool or create this amazing process or whatever, but if the people aren't going to do change, or if they're not going to, work within your processes or do the right thing, then your beautiful tech stack isn't going to work, right? There's still a human component. Maybe in 100 years, AI is going to run the whole thing and there's not going to be humans anymore. But now there's still humans need to be involved. So you got to think about how to rally those humans around what you're doing.
Yeah. And then also people adapt to change in different ways at different times. I usually call it like the light bulb switching, right? Like someone's light bulb is going to switch right away. And others, we have to turn on the light bulb, a little bit slower. And
it's like a dimmer switch.
Exactly. Exactly. And so I find that very often. And again, I think I love change management models and taking a look at them and figuring out ways on how I can use either like small abbreviated portions in any like initiatives that I'm doing myself.
Do you have any advice for someone who wants to dive into the change management world, like where they can go for more resources or?
Yeah, well, I would say I think that there's about, if I'm not mistaken, 12 different change management models. I think there's a website that I usually like. I think it's called like Mind Tips, Mind Quiz, or Mind Tools, it might be.
Yeah, I think I've heard of that actually. Yeah.
Mind Tools is a great resource when it comes to like professional development overall. They have a bunch of those change management models where you can kind of take a look at them and kind of get an understanding of like, at least for me, I do a lot of reflecting to figure out like where have people used those type of tools and also or those type of models, and where I could have used those models to help guide me through some challenging moments as well. So I think about like, for example, when there's leadership transitions or people leave the company, right? There's usually the 5 stages of grief, which is like a change management model itself, just figuring that out and then figuring out how to implement those models yourself. It's not perfect because those models are just a guideline in terms of how to guide people and institutions through change, but it isn't a complete tool set, right? There's comms plans, right? There's, effective speaking. And so I want people to think about those models as like a kind of a roadmap, but there's other tools that help you get to the end of that roadmap.
Totally. Cool. Well, I think you wanted to do some lightning questions just to
just to end it just for fun. I think it's been a great conversation, and I like ending with kind of getting to know you. So want to go through just some quick lightning round questions to end it. So the first one I'll start with, which is not related to marketing ops, but coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Coffee, good one. New York or California?
I'm in California right now, but sometimes I miss New York.
New York pizza or Golden Boy North Beach pizza?
Oh, I don't like pizza.
You don't like pizza?
No, it's terrible.
It's probably a good thing. Well, wait. It keeps you light on your toes. Golden Boy can set you back a day probably eating that.
Probably. I know. Everyone in New York, when I tell them I don't like pizza, they're like, but you're a native New Yorker.
What's your favorite market automation platform?
That's a hard one. I would probably say, in terms of my experience, I really liked Act On. I know it's a little bit of a underdog, but it was easy to implement and actually got the job done.
Growth marketing or demand gen?
As in the term?
Yeah.
Or just the term? Okay.
The term?
Yeah, because it's now you see it so interchangeable, and growth marketing can maybe encapsulate maybe actually what demand gen should be doing, which is kind of acquiring and then focus on revenue. But
I'm going to stick with demand gen. I think growth marketing for me has a different connotation, and it's going back to the revenue marketing, the revenue operations, and how people use that too loosely.
Okay, and final question, which we might know the answer just based on where you are, but sales ops or marketing ops?
I will say I'm currently in marketing ops and really enjoying my experience there, but you never know.
And last question, where can you buy the floating bookshelf from?
I think
Did you get it from Amazon or something?
No, I think I got it from Overstock, but this has definitely been a hot topic. So highly recommended. Floating bookcase, ways to keep your coworkers engaged in your Zoom calls.
Totally, yeah. Have you read all of those books, or do you start from the bottom and kind of work your way up?
I've probably read about 75% of those books.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, thank you so much for joining, Jessenia. For everyone who's interested in following Jessenia on LinkedIn, it's Jessenia Francisco. And we'll link to her profile. And thank you so much for joining us. It was great learning from you and just hearing about your background. And, maybe we'll have you on again to talk about something more technical that you can walk us through, but it was great to learn about your journey. I bet it's inspiring for maybe some folks who might be thinking about making that leap as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was really a pleasure.
Awesome. All right, we'll see everyone on the next episode of Forward Thinking.
This is Charlie. So if you liked what you heard, hit like on the platform where you watch this. Also, leave a review. Honestly, we would really, really appreciate it. You can also subscribe where you listen to your podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or even YouTube. And make sure you subscribe to our newsletter, which is packed full of exclusive content, updates for events or courses that we might be doing, all designed to elevate your marketing operations and B2B strategy. See you next time on Forward, and Forward is up.